We will now ask Dr. Enin. Ushers, can you please ask those outside to come in? His topic, Dr. Enin's topic, is under the broad governance theme, but he's going to focus particularly on national security and the impact on our quest for prosperity. I'm sure many of you have heard his voice constantly on the radio, and please, with a round of applause, let's welcome Dr. Kwesi Enin.
Okay, all right, sure, thank you. So let me try and see if it works. I'll find out. Well, it's still morning, so let me say a very warm good morning to all of you. Dr. Yamson, the Ishmael Yamson Associates Group, ladies and gentlemen, all other protocols observed. This is the first time in 36 years of public speaking around the world where I am almost accused every time of frightening people that I myself, I am frightened. As I struggled to put my paper together with a few of my colleagues at the back, I thought I would speak in moderated tones today because you are business people and I don't need to frighten investors away. But Dr. Akwa started it about, about corruption, security, poverty, unemployment. My dear friend Bill was boiling, and he had to truncate his speech. Kojo spoke about social mobility, and I want to share my own personal story because I think it's key. My mother is 85. She has polio. She was born, or she's from a small village outside Agunasredro. She managed at the age of 11 to go to Wesley Girls, went to Infantspeem School for sixth form, and went to Wesley College. So when my colleagues talk about education, that just shows the importance of education. If Mom had not gone to school, I may probably be pushing track at Makola right now, or most certainly, probably an armed robber also. Dad comes from a small village, not particularly far from Uncle Ishmael's village. He went to Infantspeem School, went to Wesley College, the University of Ghana, became a director, and at a point in time, Director General of the Ministry of Education in Zambia. Education is the fulcrum around which stability, growth, and mobility takes place. Chair, the topic that I was given, I've struggled to write because to speak the truth in this country is placing your life at risk, particularly when we do recognize from what Kojo told us that say no to corruption. Yes, it's good, but corruption is the fulcrum around which this country hangs together. We have become so corrupt that we don't know what corruption is about. That is the threat that we face. That corruption has become a part of our lifestyles, but in the end result, an existential threat to the way that you do business and the way that we'll be able to survive in the long term. So I felt that I had been saddled with a subject matter that is not only critical in terms of security and national stability, but is also pertinent to the theme of today's conversation. But it potentially also threatens to put a pessimistic twist to what I thought would be a generally positive discourse. Thanks to my 4 earlier speakers, I think the pessimism I can put aside and tell you things as is. Because I've gotten to where I am by saying things as is. So although I work at the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping Training Center and it's named after a man who always speaks in moderated tones, I don't intend to speak to you in moderated tones this afternoon. I've put a map on the slide. It's not too clear. But when we are given the statistics and the figures about doing so well, that is the poverty map of this country. We are just not doing well. Now, you can correlate the darker shades with where there are conflicts in this country. There is no business in Ghana than the conflict business. It's good, it transforms lives, it shakes up the system, it upturns hierarchies, and those who we pay with our taxpayers' monies to protect us sit on the sidelines and clap. So, Chair, I want to do a couple of things today. First, I want to focus on the seemingly set of innocuous developments that in their individual ways, we do not perceive them as posing threats to us. Okay, thank you. But combined in multiple unintended ways can become veritable threats to national security and by extension, the business environment. These threats, I argue, embody multiple correlations and they have been growing in this country. Although, typical of the Ishmael Yamson, the ostrich mentality in this country, we think they are not there. But I'll try to demonstrate that they are there. These threats, ladies and gentlemen, I want to start with in terms of crime and the dynamics of crime. By crime, I mean petty theft to armed robbery that Kojo spoke about. From physical assault to murder, from illegal mining, and I think it was good by the Chinese doing mining. But this is where the catch is. The Chinese can only come and do mining here if they have organized criminal groups located in this country, located within the interstices of the state, who allow these guys to come in, to mine, and to transfer the money. Kojo speaks about technology. We've got to identify modern technologies that allows some of these criminal networks to take the gold out of this country in a liquefied form that our scanners cannot find. Theft, crime, corruption, and collusion are all becoming existential threats. But it's not only that. We've got to look at the cyberspace. I think all of you have had your accounts hacked into before. The bankers are here. Some of you are down there. I normally take off my glasses so I don't see people's eyes. Then I can say the kind of things I want to say in total oblivion to the expressions on people's faces. So, Chair, let me first present some statistics from the Ghana Police Service on incidences of crime focusing on the Accra metropolis, and by extension, they are reflective of Ghana. And I'll do this from 2012 to 2018. I've taken a 7-year span because if I only give the first quarter crime statistics for 2018, I'll be accused of doing politics with the figures, and I'll be accused of either embellishing them and attempting to threaten people's jobs, although I will never get those jobs anyway. Second is to try to have a conversation with you about what explains the rising crime. Thirdly, would be to say, look, if the rhetoric is so good about the way the economy is going, crime is rising, small arms are all over the place, Galamsey is growing, what are the structures and the mechanisms for security governance in this country? And to what extent are our taxpayers' monies being used in a manner that we expect them to be used so that we can all feel secure? And then I'll come with some recommendations, but depending on the time, I will just try and cut it short, because I'm an old school master and I know only two colors, green to go and red to stop. Normally it takes about 45 minutes, but I think I've been given only 35 minutes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think in 2018, reports on the security situation in this country in the first quarter have painted a very disturbing picture. We don't understand the former header crisis in terms of its bigger ramifications and threats to this country. We don't seem to understand how to respond to the 5 major crimes that have increased, I argue, by about 45% this year. These include the threats that we all face in our residences, workplace, on the streets, car thefts, and increasingly Forest Bureau and mobile money thefts. Professor Pupulampo was asking us a lot of questions. How many of the companies here on an annual basis, now I can put on my glasses, put a security figure in their annual budgets? Basically, you are all sitting ducks, because you don't plan for security, you think it's not important, but I can assure you from next year, please put about 5 to 7% of your budget to protect yourselves, because it's only when you are secure that the business will grow and develop. We all do remember the violence that we saw in this country earlier on. So let me share with you a few statistics about what the reality looks like. But before then, let me accept that discussing crime statistics in this country is a very sensitive matter. Jobs are on the line, but you know what? I'm about to go on pension, so my job can be on the line. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. But to reduce the specter of doubt, the data I'm using and presenting to you comes from the Ghana Police Service. And I can assure you, a couple of official letters had to be written and signed with those who have the appropriate titles and names for us to get access to it. But as I've said earlier on, I've stretched the analysis to 2012. Crime statistics from the Ghana Police Service shows that in the first quarters of the last 7 years, a significant number, 136,000 of crime incidences were reported between 2012 and 2018 in the Accra metropolis alone. While these figures have gone up and down over the years, 2018's figures show a marked increase from those of 2017. And for the first time since 2012, the incidences have risen above 20,000. So crime is on the increase, and the multiple types of crimes in the Accra metropolis, that is reflective of the crimes in Western region and Ashanti region, are also on the rise. So what has caused this? I'm totally useless about this technology, so let me see. I'm not as good as Mr. Adamens as well. Where's Michael? You know, these technologies started way after I started to teach. So let's see if they will work. Because I thought that showing you the figures and explaining them will be very useful. But as we try to get the figure onto the board, I will just continue to speak. One of the things that, yes, good. So the figure that you see on your left shows us the crime figures from 2012. It shows you the reported cases, the cases that have been turned down, or what they term as true cases. Now, the interesting thing between the refused cases and the true cases is the gap. The more important ones relate to the numbers sent to court and the numbers of those who are convicted. Bottom line, for those of you who want to do business, if you don't invest in security for your companies, look, people will do what they want to do and there will be no convictions. That is what the figures are telling us. If you look at acquittals, the story is even more disturbing. And if you look at undetected cases and cases under investigation, what the figures tell us is that in all the years since 2012, most cases go totally undetected. Chair, this raises fundamental questions about our capabilities, our willingness, and the kinds of investments that we want to make in our security apparatuses, particularly the police service. That is the frontline institution to protect our lives and our properties, to be able to do proactive interventions. So, investigations tell us, within the period that I am talking about, 91.5% of all cases went unsolved or even unaddressed. In 2014, 87% of all cases were unaddressed. In 2016, 89%, almost 90%. This year, so far, 94% of all the cases are unaddressed. Now, Bill spoke about the need for human resources. So who are the kinds of people who are paid with our taxpayers' monies and who should be protecting us and supporting the creation of an enabling environment for businesses to grow? Once more, there seems to be a huge lacuna as to the kinds of human resources that we need on the security front, the budgetary allocations to support it, and the provision of the equipment and the tools necessary to get the job done. Let me go back and give you some more figures. In 1986, Justice Archer informed us that we needed 40,000 police officers in this country. And in 2018, we have just about 32 or 33,000. So we don't even have the figures that we ought to have had several decades ago. Now, that raises a fundamental concern as to the kind of security policy making that we have in this country, or if we ever do any security policy making at all. My answer is very clear. Security has become a wishy-washy type of lottery. We talk security when it suits us. When we think it doesn't suit us, we just throw it away. The challenge, however, is that when we sit here very comfortably, air-conditioned, have some lovely tea and coffee, those who want to threaten us and undermine us are equally as educated as we are. Now, what has shifted them is about the opportunities and the mobility that Kojo was talking about. So you see that the types of crimes that we are seeing are sophisticated. They are driven by intelligence. They are driven by technology. Whilst those of us on the good side don't have the budgetary allocations to be able to respond and to degrade. When I was coming this morning and the guy checked the vehicle that we were in, I wondered to myself what kind of training he had been given. Now, this toy mirror that he runs under the car, okay, is basically a toy mirror. But it's a useful toy mirror because it creates an impression that we know what we are doing, but very far from it. He doesn't look into the glove box because he thinks, these are big people, very nicely dressed and occasionally well perfumed, so we shouldn't search them. But it is not only the young man standing out there. When you travel to my part of town, even the police officers on the highways don't ask any questions nor check anything. So small arms flow from north to south, from east to west. Bottom line, we have exposed ourselves to such an extent that anyone at all, can strike a blow at us. And it's not difficult. We've got 2.1 million unregistered guns in this country. We are the single largest exporter of industrial explosives on this continent. I travel around this country and looked at what we call armories and magazines. Anyone at all can basically just open it. With the exception of the military, no other security agency in this country has an armory that is worthy of the name. Question: how do those who make security policy understand the operational needs and the context within which we are located so that the infrastructure will be provided for businesses to be able to do well? Because the more we brag about our middle level status, the more we brag about doing well economically, the more we attract those who want to hurt us, precisely because as individuals, we are wealthy enough to become an incentive for crimes and for attacks. So, we've put another figure on the board. And this relates to cases that are undetected and cases under investigation. What it means, basically, is that we can commit crimes, and for as long as possible, they will be under investigation. And I don't know how many of you have had cases or you've reported a case and they've been under investigation before. You end up fueling the vehicle, feeding the person being investigated. At a point in time, it begins to drain your resources, so you don't want to do it. Chair, the figures on the board creates very little confidence, and by extension, a trusting, open, and daring society that encourages businesses to thrive. If crimes are undetectable, if the numbers are low, money goes where it feels safe and secure. My argument is very simple. The rhetoric about being a middle-income country is good, but it's not backed by the necessary infrastructure to create an enabling, peaceful environment to allow you guys to feel safe and secure. So, if I think my female dog is on heat and might give birth in a couple of weeks, so you can come and buy a well-trained Boer bull from me because you need a bit of security. No, I mean this very seriously. Now, if the state cannot provide security, what we are seeing is the explosive growth in the private security sector. The question, however, is the quality of those who are in that business, the legislation around it, the kind of training, as to whether their ability to be effective relates to the monies that we are paying them. Bottom line, I think their effectiveness is less than 5 to 10%. Most of them are dozy. They are always on the phone. They've put on it armed rapid response. But that wire there is not linked to anything in your house that triggers anything in their office. So precisely because the private security businesses know that we are afraid, they are creating an opportunity that allows them to exploit us. And we are very willing to pay, happy in our ignorance that when somebody touches that wire, it gives an alarm somewhere. It doesn't go anywhere. So please come and buy some of my puppies when they are born. On a more serious note, I think it's necessary to look at the institutional factors, which I think in the public debate we overlook. What are the institutional processes and mechanisms that underpin crime control? And I think here I want to focus a little bit on the role of prosecutors in crime control. Between 2012 and 2018, 71% of all cases sent to court in the first quarter are still awaiting trial. Out of 1,269 cases sent to court in the first quarter of 2018, only 29% were convicted, 0.4% acquitted, the remaining 71% are still awaiting trial. We simply, on the security side, haven't invested, and we are not doing well. So the bankers will tell us about the fantastic figures, which I don't feel it in my pocket, neither in my stomach, though my pot belly is not that bad. But certainly we need to ask ourselves some tough questions. If the figures are so low in terms of the numbers that we've sent to court, the real question then becomes, how many prosecutors are really available to get a job done? Because let's not forget, business thrives where there's respect for human rights and the rule of law. So even when people do commit crimes and we know that they've committed crimes, we just can't go lynching them. We just can't go beating them up. We've got to use the forensics, the evidence, and to send them to court. Now we need prosecutors to get that job done. So if we take Accra as a bustling city, probably of what? 4 million? And the crime figures that we have shown, there are only 30 prosecutors for Accra, which makes it almost impossible to handle the cases. And of course, you've seen some of the courts also. It's a miracle that they haven't fallen down already. So it makes it difficult to handle these cases expeditiously, and has significantly, I argue, contributed to the soaring numbers of pending cases in courts. Considering the number of cases sent to court in the first quarter of 2018, this implies that each prosecutor is expected to handle about 42 cases. So please understand that when your cases are adjourned over time, look, the poor prosecutor who is married to a prosecutor or is related to a prosecutor, they are so tired, and you can't blame them. But it's not only about the numbers. Training or lack of well-trained prosecutors is a problem. Rapid transfers plays a role. And the few judges who are available handle multiple cases have also contributed to the backlog of cases. So the question is, how do we create an enabling legal environment that supports the growth of business, but also ensures that those who threaten that environment can be dealt with expeditiously? Because it is those expeditious treatment of cases that sends a signal to somebody who is bringing his or her taxpayers' money. And I think Bill mentioned Finland and Sweden. A Swedish investor who comes into town is coming into town with the money after he or she has paid 54% in tax in Stockholm. Now, that investor wants to ensure that in case of crimes, that the courts will expeditiously deal with those cases. We are not providing that enabling environment supported under the rule of law for this to happen. So, Chair, I think I need about 5 more minutes to round up. All that I've been talking about is that it's clear that there is a challenge with how first we manage, understand, and secondly, govern our security with respect to crime prevention and control. Security governance focuses on the structures and processes which enables a set of public and private actors to coordinate their interdependent needs and interests through the making and implementation of binding policy decisions predicated on principles, values, and shared norms. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have a panoply of legal documents that don't speak to each other but fight against each other. Because security is always something that we come to dependent on how we have woken up and from which side of the bed we woke up. If you take small arms and light weapons alone, I think when we all go to our villages and we are made chiefs and people come shooting those Dane guns, we all enjoy it. But there are 41 single legislations governing small arms in this country, all of them moving in different directions. So we need to understand what we are talking about. That on the security side, to create an enabling environment, we are failing. So I want to make 2 points. First, we need a coherent approach to security policy making. Second, we need to understand that the procedures and the mechanisms for governing security ought to and must take place within a trusting, open, transparent, inclusive environment. This thing about for your eyes only, secret, confidential, blah, blah, blah. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't help. Third, we need to dissociate politics from security policy making. Let me give you an example. When the hullabaloo about the American-Ghana military agreement came on, somebody important enough who probably has security clearance playing political games informed the public that the Americans were fighting Boko Haram from Ghana. It takes an absolute, dear ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to boil. Bill has boiled already for me, so. But it raises fundamental questions as to whether those who make the laws and our security policies understand what it means. Such behavior creates particular types of challenges to the way that we govern security in this country. One relates to the demographics. We haven't spoken very much about it. By 2050, we will be 70 million in this country. We are very fertile, Uncle. We are supremely fertile. The demographics will lead to a couple of things, 2 of which I want to talk about. One relates to the unplanned urban spaces. Huge, filthy, dusty, stinky, funky, violent. The second is that with the 70 million people, you don't hear any conversation about security policy. How many police officers we need to employ, the kind of equipment, funding, soldiers, no. So we will hit the 70 million mark and the hordes will come chasing us. 2, We need to manage the proliferation of small arms. We have this love relationship with guns and by extension violence in this country. We need to manage it. The third is that when you play the political vigilante game, it comes back to hound you. We don't know where they are. We have a fair idea where they are, physically. But we don't know their networks. We don't know who funds them. We don't know their psychological makeup. And we don't know the kind of relationships they have with the violent people around us. We need a certain responsibility in the way that we behave. 2 more points. Because of the demographics, we need to understand the way our huge youthful population think, what drives them, and what makes them behave the way they do. We don't. Al-Qaeda does, Islamic State does, Al-Shabaab does. If you look at the videos that are proliferating, no TV station, no politician in this country can speak with that passion and give the youth hope like the representatives of Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, and the Islamic Maghreb. We need to change that discourse. We need to give the people, the young people, the mobility and the hope that we have spoken about. Political meddling has destroyed our security institutions. Square holes with round pegs. Security as offhanded. I've just remembered, can we come back around the table and talk security? Security is an investment. We have an external intelligence agency. I doubt very much if they've invited any of you here and said, what do we need so that when we go to country X, we can use our intelligence to steal the knowledge and bring it for national development? No. When I teach them and I ask them, what will you steal and what will you do for Mother Ghana? They say, hey, as for me, I am a Christian. And I ask the boss, sack them and let's put them on trial. Because what is the basis for being an intelligence officer if your actions are driven by your religious values? No. We all want to go to America. But American intelligence officers' actions are not driven by his or her religious values. If I've got to sleep with you to be able to get you to sleep, to steal that blueprint, I will do it. As to whether I enjoyed what I did or not is not part of the argument. It's the national interest that is driving us now. One but last point. We need consistent, predictable investment and funding in security policy making. This ad hoc manner of, oh, we have just remembered and therefore we will give them something, it doesn't work. Finally, corruption has become an existential threat. Corruption is what will open this country up to those who seek to destroy us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kwesi Enin. Please let us give him another round of applause. As we invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Charles Boama, Senior Vice President, Africa Development Bank. Thank you, sir.
I think this Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the panel, co-panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think it's afternoon now already, is it? Let me, well, first, before I even begin my remarks, really thank my co-panelists for the comments made, because as you will find out, most of what I'm going to say really build on what has already been said. And we did not compare notes before coming here. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you first for the honor of the opportunity to share a few words with the distinguished ladies and gentlemen in this room this morning. In fact, when Dr. Yamson extended the invitation to me a few months ago, and I was looking at my calendar, I informed you that I'll be arriving here from South Korea, from Busan, actually. And those that watched the movie Black Panther, they went to Busan, and somehow I ended up in Busan. And I said, well, it's actually fortuitous that I'm coming from Busan to this a conversation about Ghana in search of prosperity, because here is a country that I believe provides inspiration that you can do it in one generation. So here I was in Busan, and in Korea, a country that has, indeed in one generation, transitioned from an aid-dependent nation to an industrialized, aid-given nation. And of course, as you would expect, this was the meetings of the African Development Bank, and there were the inevitable comparisons between the growth trajectories and the development trajectories between Ghana and South Korea. And I'm sure you've heard these stories repeated many, many times over. So, these comparisons about how from about the same starting point some 60 years ago, here we have South Korea that has grown to be, I think, the 11th largest economy in the world, with a GDP that hovers around 30,000, GDP per capita, that is, $30,000. And here we are around, what, 1,500, something like that. And as I went around the different events and the different conversations, and of course, all the ministers from all the African countries, where the all 54 African countries were represented, ministers, governors of central banks, etc. So we're having these conversations. And the common lament from many of the ministers was, we're going around to these nice places and venues, and they're looking around saying, why can't we have this back home? And they just kept asking each other. And I said, well, that's a good question to ask, but you also have the answer, and you should be part of the solution. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning to talk about just Ghana in search of prosperity. Of course, we know that natural resource endowments do not explain the difference. Indeed, our nation, Ghana, is a very well-endowed country. And so how then this tale of two nations, tale of a nation that just went that way and we are still plopping along this way? But I must say that as I looked at the comparative statistics between the various key indicators between Ghana and South Korea, there is one that we beat South Korea hands down, and that is the birth rate. And I think Dr. Ainin touched on that. We beat them on the birth rate, so that one you can. So, how then, as I said, an aid-dependent country moves to an aid-providing industrialized country in a single generation? Can or should Ghana pursue the same pathways to secure prosperity from all Ghanaians, from Accra to Tamale to Navrongo? By the way, Kojo, you were talking about how can a kid from Takwa. I spent my elementary school years in Tamale. So how can a kid from Sakasaka Experimental School, is the name of the school in Tamale, move and essentially get somewhere in life? It is possible. And how can we create this prosperity, whether from Keta to Tumu and points in between? How do we do that? Of course, there are no easy prescriptions, but I just want to share a few thoughts with you this morning. So I took the opportunity of the annual meetings to I listened to the ministers from across the continent, ministers of finance, central bank governors. We had very interesting conversations to share with me just their thoughts about how you actually create prosperity in their countries. Heard the usual things, sound macroeconomic management, absolutely can't argue with that. Better infrastructure, of course. Better governance and accountability. Increased investments in human capital. I think, Prof, you talked about that. Industrialization, moving up the value chain. I mean, there was a lot of conversation about that. Improved agriculture, and actually across the value chain, of course, in agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these comments that were made, and these are all indeed necessary. Of course, we know they are not sufficient. So I look around the room and I see, certainly on the panel here, and for the few I know in the audience, I see eminent experts in all of these areas that I've listed. So I'm not going to dwell on these. The problems are well known. Indeed, they are brilliantly diagnosed. The policy prescriptions are equally well known. And indeed, most of the policies are already in place. So here we know the problems. We know we've all the policies. And so what? So allow me to spend just a few minutes I have on implementation. That which translates excellent ideas into results, turns vision into reality. And speaking of vision, I think for Ghana, I think the vision couldn't be clearer. Ghana beyond aid. Simple yet profound. His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, the President of the Republic, has laid out the challenge very clearly, very boldly, and appropriately in my view. On this, on the vision, I don't think there should be any disagreement or any arguments. Frankly, I think any opposing view with regard to the vision would be almost the equivalent of a 10-year-old insisting on breast milk for life. And I can feel the mothers in the room cringing at the thought of. So, I mean, on that vision, there's no disagreement. But as always, it is in the implementation, how you actually go from vision to reality. And to know where to do the right things, of course, you must know what it is exactly you want to get. And so I was just thinking about prosperity. I said, well, what exactly are the dimensions of prosperity? And it is not only about, and I think it was touched on again earlier, as I said, I'm really grateful for the remarks made earlier. It's not about just creating wealth, it's also about distributing wealth. It's both sides. And so, in my view, prosperity must be shared across regions. So we saw the map of the country, and the incidence of poverty we know very well, particularly further north than in the south. So it must be shared across regions. Of course, it must be shared across genders. There's absolutely, so enough said. It must be shared across genders. Across generations, of course, current and future generations. So as we talk about prosperity, of course, we must be looking across generations. And by extension, therefore, that it must be owned. We cannot mortgage it on the backs of future generations. It has to be owned. And consequently, it has to be regenerative. You can't just chop it all and that's it. You may feel well today, but of course, the future generations will not. And then, quite frankly, must also take into account the regional and the global context. It is entirely possible to make progress and still have Ghanaians feeling less well-off relative to their neighbors. So that global context is also, and the regional context is also important. With these in mind, then, what pathway should Ghana pursue in search of its prosperity? I'm not here and I'm not offering policy prescriptions, but rather I just want to throw out some thoughts for your consideration. I'll start with investments in human capital. And I think, again, Professor, you very brilliantly earlier this morning spoke about that. You spoke about that 73%. That makes the intangible capital. Perfect. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Ghana's young population must be equipped for the jobs of tomorrow. And again, when we're talking about peace and security, and let me digress a bit here. There's a story of a young man, Modibo, in Mali, and actually it could have been any African country. Now, young Modibo went around, he was looking for a job. He saw a sign, help wanted, he knocked on the door, went in. They asked him, well, so what experience, what qualifications do you have? He said, none. And then they said, well, no, you are not the type we're looking for, no job for you. So disappointed, he kind of walked on. And then he saw this little sign that said, similar to the help wanted. Went in, same question, same response. They said, perfect, you're exactly the person we are looking for. They were looking for what? Terrorists. They were looking for people to recruit in the terrorist organization. Perfect. He just fell right into their hands. So the points you've made, the story of young Modibo illustrates that point, and this is a true story. Some of you may have heard the story before. So we must equip, and machine learning and other forms of automation are actually complicating the situation a bit. It's making many jobs being performed by machines at a fraction of the cost. Indeed, we did a study recently and estimated that 71% of occupations, as we know them today, can be performed by machines. So as we think about, investing in human capital, we must be also looking at this equation, exactly how this is going to work out. And it is why, for example, at the African Development Bank, to address this effort, we are working with the government of Ghana on a development of skills for industry project, which seeks to enhance access and also provide training that meets the current and future skills need of industry in Ghana. Under this project already, 4,520 roughly students have benefited from bursaries, scholarships, etc. In technical institutions, I heard a point about technical institutions that are non-technical earlier. Technical institutions and 13 fully equipped facilities that are currently, and some that are currently under construction. So this is just an example, but that is critical. And I can tell you that I said when I was in Busan, I had conversations with African ministers. I also did talk to some of the Korean officials and said, what exactly is behind your success? And this point came up repeatedly about investments in human capital. So we have to continue to accelerate on that. Of course, industrialization, moving up the value chain, and again, there's been many references to that, whether it's from additional cocoa processing and other systematic exploitation of our, resources, including bauxite. And here, again, a quick example, the African Development Bank is supporting the revitalization of the efforts of the government with regard to the cocoa industry. So we, and it's actually a joint thing with Côte d'Ivoire. So to move those two countries that make up some 65% of the global production from mere price takers to actually being able to actually have a say in the price of cocoa, in addition to, of course, the value addition to cocoa. So this is just one example in industrialization. Now, agriculture and food security is also critical. Empty stomachs and prosperity, they just don't go together. I mean, I cannot feel prosperous on an empty stomach. And here again, there is quite a bit to be done. I give examples just to make them concrete. Again, the African Development Bank is supporting the Savannah Zone Agricultural Productivity Improvement Project, which seeks to transform the agricultural value chains for food and nutrition security, job, wealth creation, and also in line with the government's Planting for Food and Jobs initiative. Now, the focus areas are, of course, in the savanna areas of the country. And as I speak, we have colleagues up there actually on the project site doing some work on that particular project. There are many other things in the area of agriculture that is happening. But that is, and through agriculture, we can actually also, in terms of the job creation, etc. But attention. You know, anytime, you know, how many times have you been to seminars, conferences like this, and say, well, Africa has 65% of the remaining arable land in the world, etc., and that is our advantage. True, we do have that. But again, technology, you are having now vertical farms in countries where they are using that to try to close that natural advantage. So as we think about prosperity, as we think about the things we want to do, we should also be mindful of what technology is doing to sometimes erode what you think is your natural advantage. And that is something that we cannot lose sight of. Of course, I talked about prosperity has to be, you know, cut across genders. Women empowerment issues, increasing the role of women in the economy. I think there's progress certainly in this country and in many parts of the continent, but we need to continue to do that. And there is no economy that has fulfilled its full potential without, I think, the full empowerment of 50% and sometimes 51% of the population of the country. So that is absolutely critical. And that, as we look at the whole question of prosperity, the gender dimension cannot be overlooked. And here again, there are many, again, I won't bore you with details of what the African Development Bank itself is doing, because that's not, this conversation is about Ghana, but it's because of what we are doing also in partnership with the government and with the private sector here. I'll just throw in a few examples, but let me just skip that in the interest of time. And then, of course, the regional dimension of this. Ghana, of course, can maximize on its strategic geographic location to develop a strong multimodal and integrated transportation system, which remains critical to unlocking the country's full potential as an economic hub. Now here again, just as an example, the African Development Bank is we very much present in the transportation sector in the economy, and there are many road corridors that we certainly working with the government to develop. And very soon we hope the new terminal at the airport will open, and that's one of our projects as well that we're very proud of. And it's hopefully that makes Accra, that makes Ghana a hub, an aviation hub for West Africa. Now this brings conferences, it brings jobs, this brings opportunities, and these are some of the things that we need to continue to work on. Now, everybody has to be on board. Everybody has to be on message. And again, in my conversations in Busan with the Korean, some of the high-level officials there, and anytime I had an opportunity to chat with them, I said, well, tell me more about what you've done. Now, it doesn't mean they're perfect, but it's worth listening to them and seeing what they've done. And they pointed to a very heavy information campaign that many years ago they did, just to get every single Korean thinking the same way, on point. You know, an example where there was, some colleagues were complaining that they were trying to change the program and do some things beyond the stated hours. And they couldn't get the facilities because the Koreans said, well, you know, this is the contract and this is supposed to end at 1 o'clock, and we've made provisions for 1 o'clock. Anything beyond that, you can't do. So the colleague comes to me and says, oh, these people, this mindset, they're too rigid. And I said, no, it's just disciplined. You have a deal, this is the deal, they are implementing the deal. And I said, I wish we had a bit more of that kind of discipline, because he was ready to complain that that was probably too rigid, too this and that. And I said, well, that's not a bad mindset to have. So again, this is that information campaign that they have done to get every single person on point. Now, all of these things I've said, of course, require money. So, noting the limited fiscal space and even concerns these days about debt sustainability, et cetera, and all of that, just how do you do all of these things? How do you accomplish this? Of course, there's talk about innovative solutions, et cetera, but very importantly is the role of the private sector. I think you can't say that enough. It was also again mentioned by my co-panelists this morning. And all the efforts that are being made to essentially increase domestic resources. I think there were references to revenue collection and all the efforts to plug the holes. Absolutely, those need to be done, and those are critically important. But I would emphasize just the enabling environment to make the private sector come in a much more significant way, because that's really where the answer lies. And just as importantly are the efforts to remove the heavy burden of waste and inefficiency. And again, we didn't compare notes, the very corrosive effects of corruption. I think all the co-panelists had touched on that. And here I think technology does offer some opportunities to really, and I think some of the digitization efforts and so forth that are taking place are really efforts in the right direction to try to chip away at this problem. But very importantly, of course, are the mindset changes that are needed to really make a big dent in what I think we all agree is one of the huge impediments to get into the promised land, as maybe I'd like to put it this morning. And so here again, the private sector being drawn in a much larger way. We recently are launching an initiative called the African Investment Forum. And Ghana is actually, Ghana also being a compact country, is a country that we are working very close as one of the first countries to essentially have very sizable, important projects on a platform. The African Investment Forum is a platform where we get in essentially all the key participants, including other multilateral development banks outside of the continent that are interested in coming and helping to de-risk investments and accompany the private sector to come in a more significant way. This is one, I won't bore you with the details, but this is efforts that are being made to essentially crowd in substantially more private sector to finance projects that will create the jobs, that will create the opportunities for our young people. And this is one that in the coming months you'll be hearing hopefully a lot more about, and we certainly would appreciate your support in that regard. Now, after you've done all of these things, you've touched on all the social capital, you find the financing, all these different things. Just how do you measure prosperity? How do you know you are getting there, that you are succeeding? And that's very important. Would it be just how you're doing on the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? Maybe. Other metrics, what percentage of your budget is self-finance versus maybe depend on aid. Hopefully it's that the dependence on aid is coming down. These days there are all kinds of happiness indices there. So what is that happiness index that you choose to use? Maybe the changes in your city skylines and the infrastructure development, perhaps. As I said when I was in Busan, you had all these African ministers looking around and really admiring the nice infrastructure and wondering why they couldn't have that back home, and maybe using those as also measures of prosperity. Or could it be just simply, the plumpness of the cheeks of our grandchildren? You see the kids and the nice and plump cheeks, and you go, wow, this is great, and we are really getting somewhere. Whatever it is, the point I'm making here in all seriousness, though, is that we must agree on the measures that we're going to be using to essentially track, and there are some, and indeed hold people accountable for delivering against these agreed targets. That is so critically important, and I would dare say this morning that this is the one area I think we fall short. Really holding people accountable and to these indices. I'll tell a story. 2 years ago, I was again in Korea, and after we had an event, there was a sort of a state banquet, and that time, former President Park hosted the dinner, so we had the dinner there. And just looking at her at the dinner, you would not have suspected her anything. She was calm, just relaxed and everything. 2 days later, there were people in the streets, demonstrations, and of course, not too long after that, she was kicked out. Fast forward 2 years later, I go there, and I'm asking the driver, I said, well, so where's President Park? He said, she's in prison. Now, why am I telling this story? It is not a perfect society. I mean, she was put in prison on charges of corruption as well. But the point of my story is that no matter how high you are in the system, if you fall afoul of the laws, the full rigor of the laws have to apply. And that's what happened in that case. So at least that gives you comfort that something is happening. And I think that is something, that accountability and that sense of accountability is critically important to moving the agenda forward. So let me, I could go on and tell a few more stories, but I know we don't have the time. So let me try to conclude. I think the challenge is clear, and we must pause to ask ourselves how future generations will judge us. Now, all actors have key roles to play. Government, I think I've touched on that briefly. Civil society. And yes, development partners. We all have important roles to play in this search for prosperity, which is a very worthy one, and we must pursue relentlessly. Now, do we accept the challenge? Will we change our ways? And when I say we, I think in all the speeches this morning we touched about changing our behavior, changing our attitudes, changing our mindset. It's one that's not just the government, it's also the private sector. And yes, since I'm here, not as a Ghanaian, but as a representative coming from the African Development Bank, yes, the development partners and development agencies also have to change their ways. It is not good enough to come to a country and to be, quote, quote, preaching what needs to be done. It's really to listen to what the country needs and wants and supporting them in the best way possible. That's a quid pro quo, though, that you do that, but the country also is showing accountability, is showing results. And I would say right now on the continent, actually Rwanda serves as a very good example, where they've made it very clear what it is they want. They are holding everybody accountable. They have clear measurement of results. And as a result, they are able to tell their development partners exactly where they need help and not have the development partners dictate where they think Rwanda needs help. So we also have to change our mindset in that regard. Anyway, so let me try to conclude then that as we look and march in search of this prosperity, again, thinking about the future generations and how they will judge us. You talked about AU's Agenda 2063, so maybe, and you also, I think I heard also 2048, whatever future date you choose, our children, our grandchildren, they look back, and hopefully the story they would tell is, our dear nation, Ghana, for the first 60 or so odd years, people used to compare them to Korea, and they said they were now way behind Korea, and things are not. And then something happened in 2018, 2019, that changed the trajectory. And now, Ghana is indeed, so we are sitting maybe 40 years from now, right? It's now an industrialized nation that is moving forward, that is actually even helping other nations. That is the story we want to tell. And we cannot disappoint our grandchildren. I think we can do it. And I think this morning I said, well, I think we heard them, so we did start on a note of optimism and talk about all the pessimism, talk about all the problems and so forth. No, it is about moving forward. It is about accountability. It is about being results driven. It's about focusing on implementation As I said earlier, we've diagnosed the problem enough. We have all the policies. Let's just implement. I thank you for your kind attention.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Charles Boama. Please, another round of applause. We're now going to spend just a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes or so, to ask a few questions of the panel. And then afterwards, we will have lunch and go into the roundtable discussions. And permit me to explain a little bit what's going to happen then. We have 4 rooms set up in Kundum, Ojra, Tedudu, and Adaikesi. We are in Adaikesi now. And in each of these rooms, we will deal with one of the key topics. So those of you who want to explore the security and governance presentations by Dr. Enin and Mr. Charles Boama, you will... I just lost my slide. You will be in the Ojra room. Those who will... Hello. Okay, so yes. So those who want to explore the security and governance, you go to Kundum. And your roundtable discussions will be led by Mrs. Mansanete of Standard Chartered Bank and Mr. Raymond Aka of Ishmael Yamson and Associates. And for social mobility and social stability, that roundtable will be held in the Ojra room and will be moderated by Mr. Nana Redamwa and Mr. Andy Mensah of IBM. Mr. Nana Redamwa is a well-known and well-respected author, Ghanaian author. The Human Capital Development Roundtable will be held in the Tedudu room and will be moderated by Mr. Kojo Choi, Mrs. Ethel Kofi, and myself. And then the Competitiveness Roundtable will be in this room, moderated by Mrs. Jibodi Dosu, Dr. Hazel Beradamwa, and Mrs. Nana Isilfua Boyson. The idea is that in each of these sessions, you will have a 1-hour conversation at the end of which 3 to 5 must-happens, must-dos will be presented back to the main group. And then we will take that as a working agenda over the next year to represent your views as corporate Ghana. There were about 60 leading members of the policy-making sector and public sector who were invited, but unfortunately, for various reasons, could not be here. But they will hear from you through the outcome and the output of the roundtable. That is our promise to you for supporting us with your presence and for giving us, lending us an insight into your thinking and your thoughts about truly what is required to take Ghana into prosperity. So I will now hand over to Dr. Yamson and the panel to take your questions. I will only moderate and point to who can stand and speak.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to you all. My name is Francis Amwako. I work with Barclays Bank Ghana. My question is not directed to specifically any of our speakers. I think it's a general question. Just to pick your views, just to stimulate thinking around the development we are seeing in China. So, in a globalized world where China now looms very large, it remains to be seen how its influence on supply chain will affect supply chain finance. And I am narrowing it down to finance because that is where I operate currently. The one belt, the one road strategy will dramatically reduce traveling times to China and bring China closer to its partners in the Middle East and the Europe. China is indeed scaling up to become a mega trader with its own diversification of their role in the supply chain. For example, developing labor arbitrage into Africa. It makes the conversation around development of economic strategies quite interesting. I want to pick from you in this particular area of China consciously developing labor arbitrage into Africa. What lessons we can pick and how we can implement it on our journey of prosperity. Thank you.
Let me give it a shot. When you talked about labor arbitrage, and of course, there's the common thinking that as labor costs rise in, for example, in this case, China, in certain industries, and I think the example that typically comes to mind is textiles, then we shift to other countries, and then and actually it's happening in Ethiopia, for example. As you know, the Chinese help us set up this leather and shoe making factory that is now employing, I think, something like maybe 2,000-3,000, maybe it's gone up to 4,000 people. So that some of that is happening, but there's also and this is where when I talked about technology, we've also seen cases where it's actually reversing, where because of the use of technology, certain jobs that you thought that would migrate from higher labor costs areas to, in this case, where African countries were expecting these jobs to come, that these jobs are not necessarily come because they've used technology to reverse the flow or to essentially be able to produce very competitively. So it's a very, very, it's a dynamic here that one has to understand, that old model that things would necessarily flow from one country to the other. It's not automatic, and of course, so certain Southeast Asian countries, there's also in terms of labor cost competitiveness is one that also plays in the picture. I'm not an expert in One Belt, One Road. I've been to Beijing a few times to talk to them about that. But yes, clearly they have a clear strategy, and they are implementing that strategy. And the whole idea of, as you say, reducing travel time, reducing the cost of logistics, etc., are all elements of making them an even more competitive nation. So this is, I think, as these things happen, we also have to understand the dynamics and also be smart about how we can use these lessons to also make ourselves more competitive in the future. So this is what I'll say. These more general remarks, but hopefully they touch briefly on some of the things that you talked about. Thank you.
Maybe just let me add a few remarks. I think one problem that I have always is that in Africa we start by thinking that we are incapable of being competitive, and we are incapable of invading other countries and other territories, because we would have built skills and competencies and capacity that make us superior. There are countries which are smaller than we are, and yet they are rich, and they are wealthy, and they are prosperous, and they are considered global powers. Take Luxembourg. What has Luxembourg got? It doesn't have 1/10 of the resources we have. But what Luxembourg has is here. And they just decided that they will create Luxembourg the logistics hub for Europe. That's all. So we need to define what will make Ghana, or what will identify Ghana as a country with some unique capabilities that the rest of the world needs. If we don't do that, and I'll go back to what Prof said, if all we are doing is creating universities and technical colleges and putting hundreds of thousands of our youth in there, give them certificates, which means we have given them aspirations without thinking of what is it that we are giving them that will make this country unique. What will it that will make Ghana a different, what will be our differentiator to the rest of the world? If we begin to think about that, there should be no fear about China, because there's something China also needs. I don't think China has everything in the world. After all, the people in China are human beings like we are. And the people in South Korea are like us. Why is it that South Korea is not afraid of China, but we are afraid of China? Why? Because we have spent years doing nothing but making sure that everybody is poor. That's it.
Thank you. Do we have any other question?
Good afternoon, distinguished guests. My name is Sam Ekuban. I work with 3PAC Africa Network. I'm a business process practitioner and also business and social advocate. I want to focus on education and here precisely our basic education. Mr. Kojo Mensah made some passionate presentation on our educational system, especially the public education. It looks like there has been a consistent agenda of running down our basic education in Ghana over the years. If you look at it, it's going down, its standard is going down, and the private educational institutions, basic ones, are going up. It looks like there's a deliberate attempt in running down one and lifting up one. And it is very sad because it's created a very big gap for those in the public sector, in the public education, because education basically is the equalization factor, is the equalization platform where the have and the have not can jump onto and make progress in life. I also happen to live a little bit in the north, way back in the late 70s, and my dad went on transfer, so we all went there. Right from Cape Coast, we were moved in there. And I tell you, when we got to the north, my dad did not have a problem getting a school for us. And it was not a private school. He got us a basic school. From there, we were able to go into secondary school, pass the common entrance, and rise. The quality of teachers in those basic schools were good. They had all gone through the specialist education in Winneba at that time. And so why is it that now it's not so? I wish Imani and other research institutions could help me do a research. Look at Ghana Education Service. Look at people in policy-making decision positions in Ghana. In which school do they have their people, their children? All of them in private schools. Why is it so? Where are we heading towards? I believe that we need to look back and stop creating the social stratification, classification of people, the have and the have not, or you can get it if you go through this private school and you can never get it. That is how it's become. You go through those private schools, public schools, and you have a hopeless future. And that is why we have some of these problems rising up. Armed robbery, the youth, because we've created a hopeless situation for some class of people in this country. And that is why we have a national security issue on our hand now. Thank you very much.
Michael, I'd like to comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Kuban. This one is my area, so I can talk to it. But let me share just something very quick. I even have a more radical view about our educational system. It's a pity that over the years it's been politicized to such a bad extent. You remember 4-year, 3-year, 4-year SHS? We were just playing with the kids. I mean, how can you just play with kids' future by doing 3-year, 4-year? In my view, another problem we have is the length of time we even stay in secondary school. Those who know, in our time, you would have 5 years before you are ready for a terminal exam. In that 5-year period, which was the O-level, you have time to become a rounded student. You have time to explore yourself and know whether you even have certain skills in football, in sewing, in other curricular activities. Today, they walk into SHS 1 and they have literally 18 months to be ready for an exam. All the teachers are doing is exam. And the schools still want to do their ranking so that Kwabotre is number 1, Fanspem number 2, not my village school, St. Peter's. So all the focus is on the exam. The students come out and they are not rounded in any shape or form. If I had the power to change policy, we will go back to a 6-7 year primary education and hit another 7-year secondary education before you walk into any tertiary institution. That is what I think we should be telling the policymakers. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You have a question. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Estelle. I'm from MTN. I just have 3 questions to 3 different panel members. Okay. The first is to Dr. Yamson. I've been to a couple of these events, and usually the panel are mostly white collar or in the white collar sector. And in Ghana, we notice that a lot of the blue collar jobs are looked down upon. In our environment, how do you think we can uplift the blue collar sector? Because I think it also plays a part in prosperity of a country such as ours. And how can we encourage, I think it's a bit too late for the baby boomers, but at least the millennials and the Generation I, to look towards the blue collar as well, and then use that also as a channel for prosperity for the country. I would like your thoughts on that. And then to Mr. Adai Mensah, there's a huge boom in startups, a lot of people doing side jobs, new, entrepreneurship, a spirit of entrepreneurship going around at least Accra that I'm seeing among my mates, the millennials. But there's very little financial expertise as to what key things to do to sustain that spirit of entrepreneurship and move that to the next level. What 3 fundamental financial ideas or financial steps would you advise any new startup to take? I think this can go to, can I call you Kojo? And also Mr. Boama, if you would, from your take, what kind of financial steps should we take as into? I'm speaking for myself because I have a small side thing I want to start as well. So anyway, and then to Prof, last one. Sorry, I'm a lady, so we talk a lot. But anyway, there's always a balance between experience and attitude. Very new, most of the graduates coming have little or no experience, but a couple of them have great attitude. What are your thoughts on hiring attitude over experience or, over skill? Thank you.